Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome back to Everything Within podcast. I'm your host, Alina Krasnožon. Every episode is a doorway back to yourself, back to your truth, back to who you were before the world told you who to be, because everything you've ever needed has always been within you. I'm so glad that you're here. For most of my life, I was running. Everything I was building, every choice I was making, it was all constructed around one thing. Not feeling what I didn't want to feel. I didn't have a name for it back then. But looking back, my entire life was organized around avoiding suffering, distraction, suppression, staying busy enough that there was no room left to actually feel what needed to be felt. And for a while, it worked. I had comfort, I had safety, a life that made sense on paper. But a life built on avoidance isn't really built on choice, it's built on fear. And everything you construct from that place will eventually crack, because the things you refuse to feel, they don't go away, they're just waiting, and one day everything you were running from catches up with you. Suffering is a part of life, we all know that, we've heard it 1,000 times. And it still doesn't make it easier when you're in it. But what I've come to understand is that suffering itself is rarely the problem. What we do with it is, because pain has something in it, it's trying to show you something. It's an invitation, sometimes a brutal one, to stop, to look, to meet the parts of yourself you've been avoiding. Suffering is a doorway. And on the other side of that door is the possibility of becoming who you were always meant to be, but only if you let it transform you instead of spending all your energy trying to escape it. This episode is not about positive thinking. It's about what becomes possible when you stop running from your suffering, when you stop trying to fix the pain, manage the pain, outrun the pain, and you finally turn toward it instead. Let's talk about comfort first, because there is nothing fundamentally wrong with wanting it. When life has been hard, when you grew up without real safety, without emotional support, without anyone making you feel like the world was a place you could trust, of course, your whole being is going to reach for comfort. Of course, your nervous system is going to cling to anything that feels stable. That's not a weakness. That's what survival looks like. But here is what no one tells you about a life built entirely around seeking safety. When you never had it growing up, you don't develop the capacity to expand. Everything unfamiliar feels like a threat. Every risk, every step outside the familiar registers somewhere deep in your body as a question of a life and death, even when it isn't. So you stay, not because you're lazy, not because you don't want more, but because expanding never felt safe, so your whole system learned to contract instead. And I will be honest, I felt a lot of grief around this, looking at people who grew up with security, with emotional support, with parents who made them feel safe enough to want things, to try things, to fail and try again. They started building early because it was safe for them to expand. Well, I spent years, my childhood, my teenage years, my 20s, just trying to get through, just surviving. And then you look at your life and wonder why you haven't built more, why you can't seem to move forward. And you blame yourself, but you were never given the tools. You were never given the foundation. So most of the choices made from that place, there aren't really free choices. They're responses. Trauma responses, even if they feel like decisions. The relationships that felt like safety, the job that felt like fulfillment and control, the endless achieving, trying to finally feel enough. All of this was never going to give you what you were actually looking for, because real safety can never come from the outside. It can only be ever built from within. And at some point, for a lot of us, life stops letting you avoid the truth. Something cracks, maybe slowly, maybe all at once. The relationship that was supposed to be perfect becomes a mirror of everything unhealed inside you. The career starts to crumble. You feel hollow, empty, controlled by reactions you don't understand, avoiding pain you can't name. The illusion breaks, and that moment, as devastating as it is, that is the doorway, even if it doesn't feel like that in the moment, because without the pain, you can't see clearly. Comfort keeps you asleep. It's pain that cracks open the real questions. Who am I? What am I actually living for? What have I been running from? The first reaction is usually grief, anger, self-blame, asking why. Why did this happen to me? Why did I let it in? And you do need the why, but the real transformation doesn't lie in the why. It starts when you stop asking what happened to you and start asking what you're going to do with all of it. That's the shift from wound to messenger, because the wound will always be the part of you. I'm not going to tell you it disappears, but you get to decide what to do with it. You get to decide whether it stays a wound or becomes the thing that made you see pain is not happening to you, it's happening for something. And the moment you genuinely feel that, not just understand it intellectually, but feel it, you can't go back. You let yourself feel everything. You let it burn. You let yourself fall apart over and over. And in that falling apart, that is where the rebirth lives. Not after the pain, not on the other side of it, but inside it. You die to who you were, to what you thought you needed, to the version of you that was built on survival. And something new comes through. Something more free, more present, more you. But that only happens when you let it in. Growth is never automatic. It requires something from you, a willingness to stay when everything in you wants to run. Every trigger, every moment of contraction, every uncomfortable thing that surfaces is the material. That's the invitation. And when you start to see it that way, each of those moments becomes a chance to regulate, to expand, to elevate, to build a little more capacity than you had before. That's how it works. Not in one big breakthrough, moment by moment, choice by choice, until one day you wake up as a completely different person. There comes a moment in real inner work, and it's one of the most disorientating moments you can have. When you start to see clearly that most of what you thought you chose, you were conditioned into. Your patterns, your reactions, the whole shape of your life inherited, absorbed, formed in you long before you had any real say. The values you chased, the relationships you chose, the version of yourself you worked so hard to become. So much of it was never really yours. It was someone else's blueprint running through you. And seeing that clearly feels like a loss, because it is. All the time, all those years of living someone else's version of your life, someone else's idea of who you should be and what you should want, that deserves to be grieved, not analyzed, not immediately reframed into a lesson. Grieved. Let yourself feel it. Stay with it as long as you need, without forcing yourself to be okay, without rushing toward the positive. Grief moves in waves, and the more you let yourself actually feel it instead of fighting it, the more it slowly loses its grip on you. It doesn't disappear, but it moves through. Just be careful not to drown in it. There is a line between feeling grief honestly and losing yourself in self-blame and self-pity. And that line matters. Give yourself love. Give yourself compassion. If the grief feels too heavy, too physical, too much to hold in your mind alone, move it through your body. Somatic practices, breath work, movement. Grief lives in the body as much as it lives in the mind. And sometimes the body is the only way through. And here is what I want you to understand about the choices you made. You could not have chosen differently. With the background you had, with the wounds you were carrying, with the tools you did or didn't have. You made the only choices you were capable of making at that time. Even if part of you believes you could have chosen differently, you could have done better, you couldn't have. not then, not with what you had. And when you really land in that truth, not just intellectually, but actually feel it, something softens, not just toward yourself, but toward everyone around you, because everyone is doing exactly the same thing. Everyone is making the only choices they're capable of making with what they have. That's what conditioning means. And then there is the pain of not fitting, the specific kind of suffering that comes from feeling like you're doing life wrong, like everyone else received a manual you somehow missed. Society sells us a template, the right career, the right relationship, the right timeline, the right version of a good life, as if one template could ever fit every single human on this planet. It never could, it never will. For me, it took years of slowly coming back to myself, to understand that it's okay to live differently, to want different things, to move at a different pace, to build something that actually fits who I am, not who I was told to be. And that process of unlearning the template, of grieving the version of life you thought you were supposed to have, that's its own kind of becoming. None of it was random, not the choices that felt like failures, not the ones made from fear, not the years spent surviving instead of living. All of it, every single piece of it, was always part of your becoming. You needed all of that to be exactly here, seeing what you can see now. That doesn't make it hurt less, but it does make it mean something. And then there is this place, this in-between place, might be one of the most painful places of all, when you've already woken up enough to see what's been running you, but you haven't yet become someone who knows what to do with that. The old way no longer works, the new way isn't formed yet, and you're just suspended. And that suspension also causes a lot of suffering. Sometimes it feels like you're going in circles, like you're suffering through the same things over and over again, and nothing is actually changing. The same triggers, the same patterns, the same pain surfacing in different phases, different situations, different years of your life. And something in you starts to wonder, is this even working? Am I even moving? You are, just not at the speed you want. And that gap between where you are and where you want to be, that gap itself, a source of suffering when you resist it. Because here is the thing most people don't want to hear: you cannot accelerate this process. No matter how much you read, how many healers you see, how many hard work you do on yourself, how desperately you want to be done with it, the healing will take the time it needs to take. Your nervous system needs to expand at its own pace. You've been repressing things for years, sometimes decades, and the body doesn't release that on a schedule that suits your ambition. The more you push against the timeline, the more you suffer. The resistance to where you are is always more painful than where you actually are. An awareness which feels like such a huge step, and it is, awareness alone is not enough. This is one of the most confusing parts of early inner work. You can see it, you can name it, you can trace it back to where it come from, and then the trigger fires anyway, the pattern plays out anyway, and you watch yourself do the thing you said you didn't want to do anymore. And you feel worse than before you could see it, because now you can't even pretend you didn't know. That's the gap between knowing and integrating. And that gap is real, and it takes time to close. And you have to be willing to live in it without punishing yourself for being there. Why does this stage feel worse before it feels better? Because when you were asleep, the pain had nowhere to go. It was suppressed, managed, kept underground. Now you're opened the door. Everything you were holding down starts to surface. Old grief, old rage, old fear you didn't know was still living in you. It can feel like you're broken something, like you were better off not knowing, but you haven't broken anything. You've just finally let the light in. And light shows you everything, including the mess. Your nervous system is expanding. You're building the capacity to hold more feelings, more uncertainty, more of yourself than you ever could before. But that expansion is not comfortable. It's not supposed to be. Just be gentle with the pace. Don't force yourself into territory you're not ready for yet. Courage is not the absence of fear, and healing is not the absence of struggle. It's staying in it. Staying with the seeing, even when the seeing is hard, even when nothing has changed yet on the outside. You don't need to have it figured out. You just need to stay. Stay with what's true right now. Stay with what's surfacing. Stay with the not knowing. Because that willingness to stay without needing to rush the answer is the work. It's how you move through the in-between rather than spending years trying to escape it. So you started to see, you felt the grief, you're in the between, staying with the discomfort, trying not to rush the process, and then almost inevitably something else surfaces. You start to look at who you become, at the choices you made, at the patterns you ran, at the ways you hurt people, you let yourself down, you built a life that wasn't really yours, and instead of meeting all of that with understanding, something in you resists, judges, punishes, and that is where the suffering doubles. Because now you're not just carrying the original pain, you're carrying shame on top of it. Anger at yourself for not knowing better, resentment for the parts of you that didn't handle things well. And here is what's important to understand. That second layer of suffering, the self-rejection, has nothing to do with the original wound. It's something you're adding, a violence you're doing to yourself on the top of everything else, and it doesn't help. It never helped. It only makes everything heavier. The part of you that you hate, the ones you're most ashamed of, the ones you'd rather no one ever saw, they didn't appear out of nowhere. Every defensive pattern, every wall, every way you learned to cope that later became a problem, it once had a purpose. It was protecting you. It was the best response available to you at the time. There is nothing shameful about being shaped by your experiences, nothing shameful about surviving, nothing shameful about being human. And when you reject those parts instead of understanding them, you don't make them go away, you just drive them underground, where they keep running you from the dark. And this is where the shadow work comes in. We all have the shadow, the parts of ourselves we've been taught to hide, to suppress, to pretend aren't there, and the belief that a life is a constant search for happiness, for the light, for only the good. That belief creates its own suffering, because life is dark and light. You are dark and light. And when you spend your energy rejecting the dark parts rather than integrating them, you're never fully yourself. You're always performing, always managing, always one step away from being found out. Real integration, real wholeness begins when you stop trying to be only the acceptable version of yourself and start turning toward all of it. But to forgive something, you have to be willing to look at it first. And that is exactly where most people stop, because looking is uncomfortable. Looking means sitting with the choices you made, the ways you acted from fear, the moments you weren't who you wanted to be, without immediately explaining it away or collapsing into shame, just looking clearly, with honesty and with kindness at the same time. That combination, honesty and kindness toward yourself simultaneously, is one of the hardest things there is. But it's the only way through. You cannot heal what you refuse to see. And I will say it again, because it needs to be said as many times as it takes. You couldn't have known what you didn't know. You couldn't have chosen differently with what you had. That's not an excuse, it's the truth. Understanding that isn't the same as avoiding responsibility. It's the foundation from which real responsibility becomes possible. Because when you're drowning in self-punishment, you're not actually taking responsibility. You're just suffering. Real accountability is clear-eyed and compassionate. It says, I see what I did, I understand why, and I'm going to do differently now. That's it, no cruelty required. And yet, most of us are terrified of softening toward ourselves. There is a voice that says, if I stop being hard on myself, I will fall apart. If I stop trying, I will use it as an excuse to never change. I know that voice. It feels like it's keeping you accountable. It feels responsible. But think about it honestly. Has self-punishment ever actually changed you? Has shame ever made you grow? It hasn't. What it produces is more avoidance, more hiding, more of the same. Self-punishment is not a catalyst for change. Compassion is what helps you to remove the punishment that was never helping you to grow anyway and replace it with something that actually can. When you can meet yourself with understanding instead of resentment, shame starts to lose its grip. Hiding stops. And in that space, in that open, honest space, real confidence starts to grow. Not the performed kind, not the kind built on achieving enough to finally feel worthy, but the kind that comes from knowing all of yourself and choosing yourself anyway. That's where inner safety comes from. Not from outside, not from the right circumstances, from here, from this, from within. There is something deeply counterintuitive at the heart of all this, because it feels like if you resist something hard enough, if you control it, avoid it, keep it at a distance, you're moving through it, you're managing, you're surviving, it feels like strength. But what's actually happening is the exact opposite. What you resist, you give power to. It doesn't dissolve, it doesn't weaken, it sits inside you, quietly shaping every decision, every reaction, every relationship, and you don't even see it happening because it's all underground. The resistance doesn't protect you from the pain, it just makes sure that pain runs the show from the somewhere you can't reach. And you can feel it, that unease, that tightening in your whole body when certain topics come up. Money, career, the fear of the unknown, needing to be seen in a certain way, needing approval, tying your entire sense of worth to how your partner looks at you, what your parents think of you, whether people perceive you as successful enough. Notice what just tightened in you as I said that. Because that tightening, that contraction is the signal, it's information, it's pointing directly at what needs to be looked at. So why do we resist in the first place? And there are so many reasons, and most of them make complete sense. Unhealed trauma, a wound so deep that nothing seems to fill it. Not money, not achievement, not the right relationship, not enough success. The fear of actually sitting down with yourself and having an honest look at your patterns, at your choices, the stories you've been telling yourself for years. The fear of feeling the shame, the hurt, the grief, the sheer unfairness and sometimes brutality of what life handed you. The fear that if you really feel it, you will lose something. The comfort, the relationships, the carefully constructed version of yourself that keeps everything together. And underneath all of it, the narratives. The stories your mind builds around wounds to make sense of them. And then mistakes for truth. I used to suppress every trigger, every time a topic made me uncomfortable, every time a person activated something in me, I would push it down, look away, redirect, and then spend days, weeks, sometimes months in my head, building stories about why I wasn't worthy, why I wasn't good enough, wasn't successful enough, why everything felt so hard, when other people seemed to have it so easily. But you never know the full story of what another person is carrying, and the stories I was telling myself weren't the truth. They were the residue of old wounds looking for confirmation. That's what unexamined resistance does. It doesn't just block the pain, it generates more of it, in the form of every narrative your mind creates to explain why you are the way you are and why life is the way it is. When you suppress, distract, numb, the thing doesn't dissolve, it waits, and it comes back with more force each time. because the pressure has been building. The resistance often creates more suffering than the original pain would ever have. But here is what I want you to hear. Your avoidance made complete sense. Feeling it fully once felt like it might destroy you. So you learned not to. That was survival. That was the only tool you had. This work cannot happen all at once. It happens gradually, in layers, each one only when you're ready for it. So don't use this as another reason to push harder or go faster. Use it as permission to begin gently from wherever you are. Because here is the difference between feeling an emotion and being consumed by it. The goal is not to rip everything open and drown in it. It's to create space between the trigger and your response, between the stimulus and the story your mind immediately builds around it. The story is almost never the full truth. It's the interpretation of someone who was hurt, who learned to see the world through that hurt. And when you can start to notice the story without merging with it, without assuming it's the absolute reality, the absolute truth, that's when something begins to shift. You're no longer just reacting, you're starting to choose. Avoidance was never meant to make you thrive, it was meant to get you through. And for a long time it did, but the cost, the long-term cost, is that you never get to be fully yourself. You maintained the mask. You built your entire life as the response to what you're afraid of, rather than what you actually want. And I believe that for deeply wounded people, and I include myself in that, a significant part of adult life is spent unraveling what was built in childhood just to survive. So what does it actually feel like to stop fighting? It feels like grieving every version of yourself that didn't make it to here. It feels like sitting with your inner child and finally giving her what she needed. It feels like regulating yourself every single time the trigger fires, not suppressing it, not exploding into it, but staying with it. It feels like detaching from outcomes, from how people see you, from the need for things outside yourself to tell you that you're okay. It feels like giving yourself unconditional presence, unconditional validation, the love and acceptance you spend years looking for somewhere else, not shaming yourself for the choices you made when you didn't know any better, becoming more and more conscious of your patterns, your responses, your stories, and staying with all of it without flinching, without blame, without needing it to be different from what it is right now. That's when inner freedom starts. Not when life becomes easy, not when all pain is gone, but when you can be with whatever is here, fully, honestly, without running, and know that you are okay anyway. That's when life starts to flow, not because everything is perfect, because you finally stopped fighting yourself. The perspective shift doesn't arrive like a revelation. It doesn't come at the end of a breakthrough session or after the right book or the moment you finally understand the root cause of everything. I used to believe that if I just understand it deeply enough, it would feel differently, and I kept searching for that understanding, kept pulling at threads, kept asking why, as if the right answer would finally make it all stop hurting. But that's not how it works. And at a certain point, the searching itself becomes another way of not arriving. The shift comes quietly on the ordinary Tuesday, when a topic comes up that used to make your whole body contract, and it still registers, you still feel it, but something is different. When you have to do something that used to terrify you, and you just do it. When something you were certain you could never survive without ends, and you're okay. Not performing okay, not pushing through, just genuinely, quietly okay, peaceful with what is. And it doesn't feel like a peak moment. It doesn't feel like you're finally arrived somewhere. You just feel like you're moving through the world differently, like there is more room inside you than there used to be. That's what the years of healing actually built. Not the absence of pain, the capacity to be with it without being destroyed by it. Your nervous system slowly rewired through thousands of small moments of choosing to stay instead of running. Your body is catching up with what your mind understood long ago. Every version of yourself, the one who survived, the one who hid, the one who made choices from fear, the one who didn't know any better finally accepted, not despite everything you've been through, because of it. There will be a point in this journey, and maybe you're already there, when the pull towards suffering becomes its own trap, when you merge with the struggle and make it your identity, when the wound becomes the whole story, and you hold onto it because without it, you don't yet know who you are. I understand that place, but you are not your trauma. You are not the sum of everything that was done to you or everything you did from that place. The old wounds are parts of you, they always will be, but they don't have to be all of you. They can be integrated, held without shame, without resistance, without the need to hide them or perform your way past them. Just part of the full, complicated, remarkable thing that you are. The same pain held differently becomes entirely different material. That's the alchemy. Not transforming the past, you cannot touch the past, but transforming your relationship to it in real time, in this moment and the next one. You stop being controlled by it, you stop reacting from it, you start making choices from a deeper place, from actual desire, actual knowing, actual presence. And that's when life begins to feel like yours, not perfect, not without pain, but yours. So I want to leave you with one question, not to answer right now, but to carry. The next time something makes you contract, makes you want to look away, makes your whole body tighten, instead of asking why is this happening to me, ask what is this asking me to look at? That's it. That's the whole practice. Everything else follows from that. This is the relationship between pain and growth. Not a straight line, not a destination, just an ongoing process of meeting yourself more honestly than you did before. Real alchemy is slow. It needs time, it needs space, it needs your presence, not your perfection, not your understanding, just your willingness to stay. So give it that. Give yourself that. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Until the next time. Bye!